Greetings, everyone. This is Kelly O'Donnell from Geneva. I just arrived back after being 5 days at the International Anti-Corruption Conference in Washington, D.C. So I want to give a few reflections over the next 5 minutes about my experiences and thoughts specifically about how we all could potentially connect and contribute to mainstream anti-corruption efforts more, including this major conference. The conference was attended by over 2,000 people live. It was held at the Omni Shoreham Hotel in DC. It's a beautiful, historic, and quite famous perfect venue, really, for something this large. And there were over 1,000 people who attended online. So in total, over 3,000 people from over 125 countries participated in the 20th International Anti-Corruption Conference. Now, the theme of this particular conference was uprooting corruption and defending democratic values. And democratic values and emphasizing things democratic is crucial and was presented as being crucial because corruption and anti-corruption efforts are so linked into healthy, thriving democracies. Democracies were centrally placed at the IACC because they emphasize good governance, such as the rule of law, respect for human rights, human worth and dignity, free speech, free press, an independent judiciary, voting rights, transparent and accountable governments, strong civil society, and all the things that are really essential to help counter corruption. Hence, democracy was really emphasized. Another reason why I think it was emphasized is because the first summit on democracy convened by the United States, attended by over 100 countries, took place not too long ago. And one of the pillars for this strategic summit was anti-corruption. The second summit, it was so successful, there's going to be a second summit in 2023. I believe it's in March. And so this was held, this conference, around the time of International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December, 2022. And the theme for this year's Anti-Corruption Day, rather, is uniting the world against corruption and focusing on the United Nations Convention Against Corruption at age 20, year 20. 2003, it was approved by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And so this was there was really a strong emphasis as well on Anti-Corruption Day and on the role of this key document, this international treaty called the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. There were lots of well-known politicians, speakers, high-level people that presented in plenaries. There were 7 plenaries and also more than 60 workshops. And these are just some of the people that were there. And the first woman, I want to just make a quick comment, Delia Rubio. She, in one of her comments in her plenary, talked about 4 I's that are essential for overcoming corruption and working together for corruption. The first 2 are I's we need to increase. One is accurate information, education, information, spreading the word about the reality of corruption. That's the first I. Second was with integrity, the importance of personal integrity in all that we do. And then the other 2 I's were things that we need to decrease. First was impunity for crimes and for corruption, impunity. And the second one was indifference, complacency, looking the other way on the part of the public, government officials, institutions, and so forth. There's also, in addition to the conference that was going on over the 5 days, ongoing initiatives by the International Anti-Corruption Conference, emphasizing really media, filmmaking, youth, things like that, to really get people on board in as interesting and as helpful a way as possible. So emphasizing social entrepreneurs, journalists, films, and music, such as fair play. There were 7 broad challenges identified, and all the various workshops and plenaries overlapped and could fit into some of these categories. So what are some of the global challenges related to corruption as seen by the IACC? First is uprooting corruption. Global security demands global response. We have to pull together globally the big picture, crossing national borders, crossing sectors, and so on. Second, there was a strong emphasis on defending the defenders. That is, the people who are anti-corruption activists and human rights defenders. They are vulnerable and we must protect them. Third, we need to build a path towards a fair and sustainable future in light of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next, overcoming corruption, the race against the climate crisis. Climate and corruption was really emphasized, and the two go together. And if we don't undermine corruption, the climate crisis is just going to get worse. Next, ending criminal networks, dark markets, and cross-border crimes. Next, fighting greed, kleptocrats, oligarchs, and cracking down on money laundering and the enablers. These were all key terms and key approaches that were emphasized. And I do want to just say that greed was explicitly mentioned more than once, although it did not go into a lot of detail in terms of human greed, the origins of greed, and what propagates it. Then finally, the future of the fight against corruption was a seventh theme or a seventh global challenge. The opening plenary, the first one, was focusing on uprooting corruption and defending democratic values. It was great. Samantha Power, the 19th Administrator for USAID, and many other people just spoke brilliantly. It was wonderful. And I really want to recommend, as soon as these plenaries and workshops are online and archived for free, to go ahead and look through them and watch them. But the two that I really want to recommend is the opening ceremony, and then that was followed by this event here, the opening plenary. You will get a good view of a lot of the issues, the language, the terms, especially if you're not necessarily familiar with a more technocratic, governmental, regulatory approach to confronting corruption. This will give you a good view, and it's actually quite inspirational, and your head might very well be spinning as a result of that. There were 2 of the 60 workshops that were explicitly focusing on corruption in the Christian sector or faith-based sector. And one of the ones that I went to both, but this particular one, Corruption and Impunity in God's Name, How to Tackle Trafficking, Money Laundering, Dark Money, and much more in religious organizations. This was pretty good. And I must say, though, it focused mostly on the negative aspects of what the Christian church is doing or not doing, and examples of, say, of kind of like false preachers, evangelists, and people that are just ripping people off. So all the negative examples of corruption in the church, rather than the positive efforts in the Christian organizations that are out there fighting corruption in an exemplary way. I want to just share a few takeaways with this now. I know I've just given a brief overview of some of the things. It was great in general, and as I've said, I found the conference to be really worthwhile, intense, learning more from the perspectives and work of governments, financial and regulatory bodies, civil society colleagues, about the ongoing and changing realities of corruption and the measures to fight it at all levels and in all forms, including things like grand corruption versus petty corruption. And unfortunately, though, there was little explicit involvement or mention of the crucial and major role of faith-based organizations. I kind of sense that there was sort of a non-faith-based orientation, and perhaps even at times an anti-faith-based orientation towards the ethos and the culture of this conference. My main takeaway, though, is that there's so much of value to know about and learn from in the mainstream anti-corruption sector, including this biennial IACC event. Christian agencies and leaders and advocates should carefully consider how best to further connect and contribute to these efforts for mutual benefit, locally through globally, including those of us in the GIN network and colleagues, Christians that are involved in this area. Indeed, there are many stellar examples of Christians engaged in anti-corruption work, both who are working within secular organizations and faith-based organizations. And so I think there's a lot to really build upon and to connect with. But for more specifics regarding to these takeaways, the question is, how much should we connect and contribute to these mainstream secular approaches? And of course, my response would be, oh, very much so. Some for us more than others, but I think there is so much there for mutual learning, support, and collaboration. But 4 broad areas. First, we really need to learn the language, glossary, metaphors, ethos, history of the secular mainstream anti-corruption efforts, not to isolate ourselves. There was so much going on, and some of the terms that were used a lot and some of the important concepts that are very relevant for us in the faith-based world would be kleptocracy, state capture, regulatory capture, dark money, straw donors, shell companies, know your clients, the role of the massive role of enablers, grand corruption versus petty corruption, digital dictatorship, state capture, regulatory capture, and so on. There's many terms that we really need to understand and develop fluency with. Some of the major players, there's lots that we need to connect with and can connect with. One in particular that I have found very helpful is a civil society coalition focusing on the implementation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And that's the UNCAC Civil Society Coalition. Visit their website. You will find lots and lots of helpful, relevant resources. And then being very familiar with some of the major tools, treaties, resources, and so on. And some of the major ones, as I see it, would be the UN Convention Against Corruption from 2003, especially Article 13 on the role and involvement of civil society. I'll read that in just a second. And then the second UN convention related to corruption is the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. And it's important for us to know that of the 17 SDGs, SDG 16, Sustainable Development Goal, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, explicitly mentions crime and corruption as being really important to confront and to reduce. And as it came out over and over again in this conference, corruption undermines our best efforts to realize all 17 sustainable development goals. So if we really want to progress towards human well-being, planetary well-being, equality, and so forth, we must shine a huge light on the reality of corruption and confront it. And then being aware, the fourth point, of major events that are happening around the world. For example, every 2 years, there's the Conference of the States Parties to the UNCAC, where the countries meet to talk and debate and to deal with how they're dealing with corruption and so on. I'm just about out of time, I'm sure, but I wanted to go through Article 13 briefly, and from the UN Convention Against Corruption. And it states this: each state party shall take appropriate measures within its means and in accordance with fundamental principles of its domestic law to promote the active participation of individuals and groups outside the public sector, such as civil society, non-governmental organizations, and community-based organizations, in the prevention of and the fight against corruption, and to raise public awareness regarding the existence, causes, and gravity of and the threat posed by corruption. This participation should be strengthened by such measures as, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, in this legally binding treaty, which almost every country is a state's party to, the central role in giving place for civil society organizations like yours and ours is really, really key. So an all of society, all of government approach, collaborative, is really very much emphasized. So where do we go from here? What would I like to suggest in review? Do have a look at the opening plenary and the opening ceremony. And as I said, you'll get a good feel for it. You might want to go through the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, go on the website for the UNCAC Civil Society Coalition, and then also you might want to carefully consider talking with colleagues about some of the things you were learning and find some tangible ways for you to connect with the mainstream anti-corruption movement. What's next for us and what's next for I believe a lot of people is Global Integrity Day, which my wife and I sort of curate and steward, coming up on the 9th of June, 2023. It's the third annual day. We see this as a complement to the 9th of December's UN's International Anti-Corruption Day. So this is the next step 6 months from now to rally behind the efforts for greater integrity and greater anti-corruption efforts. So thank you for listening, and I welcome questions and comments when we have time to interact. Thank you.